Welcome to Prevention 101, a 5-part series exploring the foundational principles of substance misuse prevention on college campuses. This series is brought to you by the Higher Education Center for Alcohol and Drug Misuse Prevention and Recovery through The Ohio State University. Dr. Jim Lange serves as the Executive Director for the Higher Education Center and also serves as Coordinator of Alcohol and Other Drug Initiatives for San Diego State University. He has also served SDSU as their first Director of the Standalone Health Promotion Department. His research and service career have earned him an international reputation within the field of alcohol and drug misuse prevention. In both 2014 and 2015, he was awarded the California State University Chancellor's Award for his service towards statewide progress in alcohol and drug prevention. Dr. Lange was selected by the National Institute of Health to be one of 5 research scientists funded to facilitate their multi-campus rapid response to college binge drinking initiative. From his various research grants, Dr. Lange has authored over 60 scientific publications that have been cited within more than 2,700 publications. A number of his studies have been featured in major news outlets, and his study documenting Salvia divinorum's effects through analysis of YouTube videos earned him recognition by Wired UK magazine's feature 25 Big Ideas for 2011 and the BBC Radio 4. Dr. Lange advised or currently assists several state and federal efforts, including the California State Prescription Drug Task Force, San Diego County Alcohol Policy Panel, and RAD, the entertainment industry's voice for road safety. A San Diego native, Dr. Lange received his undergraduate education at Pitzer College and his doctorate education at the University of Maryland, College Park. Before coming to SDSU in 2001, he was a senior research scientist with the Pacific Institute for Research and Evaluation.
Thank you for letting me speak about a program that I'm actually pretty excited about that we've done on it for a number of years at the San Diego State University. Something we're calling Aztec Nights. And it's a large-scale behavior alternative or alternative programming for our students that we put on every year, especially in the fall, as students are new to the campus. So in order to get you a feeling of what Aztec Nights is about, we actually have a promo video that I'm going to show, because I think a lot of times people don't understand the scale of the programs that we're putting on weekend nights. So we'll run that video and then I'll tell you more about it. So from what you can see, these are large programs that we do most weekend nights. Actually, for some of it is Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, the first 5 weeks of the semester. And these are big There's big dances, literally a carnival is brought onto campus. Some of them are a little more low-key, like movie nights, but we do them outside so that we can have hundreds of people gathered on the grass in a particular area on campus. We have live shows and other sorts of activities. The idea here is to scale them such that they are hard to avoid. You really want to be there for it. Stepping back a bit, just to show you where this fits within our prevention model. It's obviously not our only prevention that we do at San Diego State, but it fits within the functional approach that I discussed in the introduction, where we have things that block students from access, deflect, which is allowing them to do the things they want to do, just in a way that doesn't involve misusing alcohol and other drugs, or things that try to counter or remove attractive force. This one really fits within the behavioral alternative perspective of our prevention strategy, which is we understand that students, especially the students just arriving to campus, they want to meet people, they want to be out late, they want to have something new and exciting happen, they want novelty, and they want, in a sense, to be in crowds. And those are all the features of a large house party, for instance. Those are the things that students are after. Of course, at the house parties, they may be also be thinking, well, I also want to get drunk or want to consume a lot. But there's those other pieces of what they're actually after. They're actually after social interaction. They want to meet people. They may want to meet people of sexual interest. They want to start that process of engaging with the community in a very late adolescent, young adult way. And so we recognize that and try to provide something that meets those needs. Now, some disclaimers here. This is actually a bit of an older way that NIAAA used to talk about, the National Institute on Alcoholism and Alcohol Abuse, used to talk about prevention on campuses, where they talked about tiers of effectiveness, like is there evidence that it's effective among students, evidence that it's effective in the general population, evidence from a logical perspective, but not necessarily tested, and something that may be actually evidence of ineffectiveness. And when you look at the way they would classify interventions, behavioral alternatives were mostly in the not tested range. They make sense, but don't really fall under the evidence-based approach. So understand that there's still not a great deal of research support for engaging in these types of programming. However, I'd argue they're an important part of a comprehensive strategy, even if they alone aren't the solution to the problems that you're trying to address. They do fit nicely with stepped up enforcement, policy restrictions, and individual or motivational approaches as well, providing students that ability to go somewhere and meet their social needs away from the places you may be trying to restrict anyway. Things about the environmental risk in general play into the creation of alternative programming. A very simplistic way of thinking about when are you going to see misuse of, especially alcohol in this regard, in the environment. If you have young people, if they lack adult supervision, you're more likely to see it. If the environment facilitates alcohol use or misuse, you're more likely to see young people engage in it. And if it's available, those three pieces, you put them together, you're more likely to see young people misusing alcohol. And now think about what happens off campus and the social events that might be happening near your campus or in the places where students go. They pretty much lack adult supervision. They expect a certain level of consumption, and they have quite a bit of access. So those pieces are present. You'll also have less you can do off campus in terms of intervention points. You may not control those environments as well as you control what happens on campus. The other piece is, and one of the reasons we focus our programming at the beginning of the fall semester is your students are coming to campus, they are developing a student identity. They don't necessarily come to you saying, I am a Aztec for our students. They may still identify more strongly with the high school they're coming from or their family or their group of friends, but they're going to start developing some level of identity, and the content of that identity and how that affects their engagement to the campus is really important. So providing experiences that help develop that identity in a positive way makes a lot of sense. So we want to keep them and bring them on campus if they're not residents already. So just as I said, those first weeks have been shown not only to help with the student identity development, but they're also really high risk times for students. That time where they're first experiencing the lack of adult supervision, perhaps, or the extended, or it's much less than they even had, and they may have had some level of that coming in. It is a high risk. If you look at your data, you probably, if you have medical transports, a good chance of them are happening those first few weeks. The number of violations that happen those first few weeks are really important. So thinking about that timing is important when you start thinking about your potential behavioral alternative programming. And then also, if you need to start getting alliances on your campus around putting forth the resources to conduct these sort of events, you could start talking about student engagement and how that predicts academic success. The fact that there's lower AOD involvement also predicts academic success. And how important is it that they're living on campus and making their on-campus life rich? Those are pieces of student success predictors. So this is just a little evidence of supporting for some of the things I just said. This is a measure that we did where we actually measured campus identity. How much do you identify as an Aztec in our case, Weaver? And sure enough, if you lived on campus, you're more likely to identify more strongly that you are an SDSU student. That's part of who you are. And also if you live close, that also, and of course those co-vary, but if you're one of our commuters and living far away, we have a hard time building that engagement. And so having reasons to come onto campus beyond the class that you had to be at is part of integrating some of those students into the campus life and developing a campus identity and better engagement. And again, engagement can improve academic success. And we also may want to think about some of the less positive identities in terms of alcohol and other drug misuse. It's always, pretty much always found that those who are Greek letter members, fraternity sorority members, are going to be higher risk in alcohol and other drug misuse. And so those who identify strongly with those groups, even if they're not members, so they may not have joined, but they may feel like they are like Greek members. They like the people who are Greek members. They like the atmosphere, and the attitudes of Greek members. That actually also predicts risk of alcohol misuse. And so this graph is a little bit confusing, but it's showing how much people identify with and think that Greek members approve of drinking, and if they identify highly with Greek members, even if they're not a Greek member, they're more likely to drink more. If they are low Greek member identifiers, then it's actually the reverse. If they think people in the Greek community drink a lot, then they actually might drink less, or at least not drink more the way. So the effect of the social norm that the Greek community may be providing is more influential on those who identify strongly with the Greek community. So we think about this because we think about who is providing those social environments to our students. They're not allowed to have parties in our dormitories, so they go into the community for them. And if it's the Greek houses that are providing those environments, in a sense, that's our competition. That's who we want to attract to our alternative events, so that we're putting them in a safer environment. Now, it's tough to offer a program that's competitive in a social way than some of these house parties. And so that's where these large scale events come in, where we really spend a lot of time planning. So it starts right at the beginning. This is some images from the first night move-in. So that'll be happening every fall. And it's about 4,000 or 5,000, maybe more, students attending a kind of show where they learn the fight song. They go through a sort of famous arch on our campus and emerge with alumni and faculty giving them high fives as they're welcomed into the campus community. And then we have a large scale dance with just outdoors, and it attracts literally thousands of students. And so it's intended to take over that first night. It starts late at night. I think it's somewhere around 9 is when the sort of show starts. The party itself is from 10 till 1. And so we're keeping them as best we can engaged in our programming and not going for the community programs. We started this back in 2008, and we've been continuing all along. It's expensive. So first of all, another disclaimer. We're spending over $300,000 now a year on our programming around Aztec Nights. That's just Aztec Nights. That's not our general prevention budget. And it comes from several different budgets across campus, including Associated Students, our business affairs group, and then our student affairs as well. So we cobbled together quite a bit of money to make sure that we're throwing events that really can't be missed. And we get quite high attendance when we do that. But we evaluated it early on. We don't continue to evaluate it because now it's hard to know what the baseline would be. But we showed that along with implementing a lot of other prevention programs, so this was that comprehensive approach, we found more freshmen saying they hadn't had any alcohol in the last 12 months on surveys, and our alcohol violations went down substantially following the implementation of these programs. They had been on an upward trajectory, then went down, and they've stayed. They actually went down a little farther, and then have bounced around a bit, but they're staying relatively constant in that regard. So again, it's hard to evaluate a particular program when you start implementing a comprehensive approach, but we feel confident that that it was an important piece to our prevention efforts. And so we've continued, and now it's a tradition. Now it would be it's something every student on our campus has experienced, and would hate to see it go. So how do you do something this big, this substantial, and why do something this big and this substantial? First of all, as I mentioned, it's certainly not my office on campus, the AOD office, with a few health educators, trying to throw a carnival. That's not in our wheelhouse. We don't know how to do that. But there are lots of people on campus who can be brought in to do that if they're your partners. So we have Student Life, of course, lead this, as does our residential education and our associated students. Students are involved in the planning, not because we think they need to inform us about alcohol prevention. They need to inform us on what's going to be fun and how we attract students to those events, how to make it look like something that can't be missed to the students of this particular year. So, you know, we've had to update our logos and our marketing approach since 2008. Those things look old and dated. So the students continuously help us keep it look fresh and exciting in their eyes, and that's critical. But so too is the critical support we get from Student Life and Leadership, who are really experts in putting on large-scale events. There's so much logistics to go through to put a carnival equipment onto campus, to bring you know, large sound systems onto our field so that we can have a rave style dance. That's just something that you need to build this across the campus, and that does separate us from some of the the alternative event type programming that I've seen on other campuses. A lot of times those are smaller scale. They may not be a whole series, like, you know, we started, I think, with 17 or something close to that, and, you know, we bounce around 13 now events, but really trying to take over the social environment is our strategy. Doing a few may not have the level of impact because it doesn't really set the tone of what social life is like on campus. And, you know, it could just be seen as an attempt to keep people from drinking. And that is a different advertising sell than you got to come to the carnival because we'll have a Ferris wheel. So that's really important that we build this in to our thinking. And again, we're trying to change the campus culture, and there's a lot of people who would like to see that happen. And so bringing them all in is important. So my day-to-day activities with ESDIC Nights has dropped down substantially because I can't contribute to what a student will think is fun. I can contribute to making sure that we keep to the reason we originally started it, so that we continue to see its benefits. So the other piece that we do, and it's really important, I think, that we do this, talked about those first 5 weeks and our competition with the Greek life in terms of the social scene. At the same time we started this, we also instituted an alcohol ban during those first 5 weeks amongst the fraternities, actually all of our student organizations. So they cannot have an alcohol serving party approved, and they are not to conduct such a party. So if they do, it's a violation. Even if they're off campus, those parties are not supposed to happen those first 5 weeks. And, you know, that's part of that comprehensive approach. It's not just that we're offering an alternative, we're also trying to restrict access, and we're trying to restrict our competition. So the Greek life doesn't become the thing that's happening across the street from our large scale event. So that's I think a critical piece. We also make sure that other programming understands the importance of ESDIC Nights. So our resident advisors are really important to bringing people, especially to those first several events, because that's a time where basically new students just kind of follow their resident advisor around. And so if the resident advisors are coming and knocking on doors and saying, okay, we're all going, that's important. So it's part of their training that they understand the importance of Aztec Nights, and so that's just part of it. We have planning that's pretty much ongoing. You can't throw large events like this without really a semester worth of planning. So planning for this year has already happened long ago. Now it's just execution. We'll be planning for fall in the late fall of this year and early spring to make sure we've got these programs in place. You also need to have the right people on campus who know what you may be competing with. On our campus, we have venues that host concerts, sporting events, that sort of thing. And so having a large scale event that's only really for students happening in proximity to our venues is a problem. And so we need to make sure we have the right people understanding what else is happening on campus. Obviously, the more you spend, the more you can do with it, but there's a limit. So we're always mindful of that. And we don't have this all rest on one department or one person's desk. It's spread out. So sometimes the events are hosted by residential education, sometimes they're by student life and leadership, sometimes they're associated students. They all take pieces of this because it's a very complex set of programs, and they happen sequentially. So if you have one Friday night going till 1 or 2 in the morning, it's hard to get your staff there for the next night, 10 till 1 or 2 in the morning program. So rotating this through various departments is important. Then we just have some general things we continue to discuss when we talk about Aztec Nights. You know, it's fun to have go-kart racing happen in one of our parking lots, and students lined up by the hundreds to do it, because who wouldn't want to do that at midnight on campus, or your first week on campus? That's awesome. But it's noisy, and we have neighbors, and we need lights, and our dances have large amplifiers, and so we're always mindful of how our late night programming is seen as a benefit to our community. We're keeping our students on campus and not roaming through the neighborhoods looking for house parties. They're not drinking at our events. So there's all the benefits, and we try to make sure they understand that we're not throwing the ragers that might be bothering them on their streets. We're throwing something to keep the students on our campus. But the noise is still a problem, and something we're mindful of. So planning where the event is on campus to minimize that. Doing some subtle things like when we do a large concert / dance that's going well into the night or into the morning, how much bass is in the speakers is important, because that really carries, and where we can position things so that buildings block the sound and don't go into the community. So those are important. The others is, you know, what about pre-gaming? What about students who come having consumed? You know, where we've landed on that is when we had go-karts, the answer was no. And in fact, we breath tested them, and there was a little education that went on about impaired driving. And students didn't come, it turns out, having consumed alcohol, so that was good news. But if they had, they wouldn't have been able to drive. Would they have been kicked off or sanctioned? No. We really actually want this to be a place where they can have fun and not drink more, at least, as long as they're not causing a problem. So if they're noticeably intoxicated, drunk, stumbling, throwing up, those sort of things, we'll address that, and we don't have them part of our party. But we're not looking to make sure that no one has had a touch coming in. And of course, we don't want them drinking during the event on the premise. And so we have security there. But honestly, I've gone to many of the events, and I've never seen that as a problem. The students are there to engage in the fun that we've set up, and they're happy to do it. The other is whether or not we do things like educational programming. I just mentioned we had the DUI piece. That was actually unique. We do our best to keep any alcohol messaging, anything related to health, really, except under a few differences. Like one time we had a late night 5K run, and then a party afterwards. That actually didn't work so well, so we haven't been doing that again. But we really try to keep the focus on the theme of the party, which could be a Monte Carlo night. It could be a Western, hoedown type thing, or Western music, or a late night electronic music with, kind of a rave feel. Those don't really lend themselves to learning about alcohol, and it would just seem weird, and it would seem counterproductive. We want them to meet all those social needs. That's why we're throwing. So we have made a conscious decision to keep other programming out of the event and keeping it pretty strictly fun as the reason it's there. Now we have some other late night programming that we don't use the Aztec Nights brand on, that we use a Live Well late night brand that is more about physical fitness, nutrition, alcohol prevention, alcohol and drug use and misuse prevention. Those fit nicely within those, but those don't have the kind of strictly social event perspective. Our advertising doesn't mention it as an alcohol-free event. It just should be assumed. If we're throwing it, it is, and that's what students seem to come with. So that's answering that, embedding the health questions. The timing and conflicting activities, those are really important things to think about. Can a small-scale program work? You'll have to think about your community of students. Will that serve that social function that they're after? Doing something new, doing something where they feel like they're part of a scene of their fellow students. Are they meeting people? Is it a loose enough environment that if there is sexual interest, they can try to fulfill that? Those are sort of the things driving them to late night events. And again, late night events is critical because that's another piece. They want to be up late. And so that's really the questions you'll need to answer if you're going to do this on a smaller scale. Will it serve those pieces? They want it to be loud. They want it to be big and crazy. Now, there are some students who don't want that. And providing for their social needs, I think, is really valuable as well. Whether or not they're the highest risk group, I don't know, but that's something you can consider when you're doing these programs. And some of the things we do are not parties; they're like the movie night, so it's not always some sort of huge dance or carnival. So those who just want to do a double feature that it stretches late into the night and be with several hundred fellow students, that's good too. It's just harder to mingle and meet people in those sorts of types of parties. And so that's our programming. It is unique in the sense that we have quite a bit of resources and now quite a bit of experience putting together large-scale events, but we really do try to take over the social life, that late night, off-hour night nights of our students for as long into the semester as we can, so that becomes a piece of what it means to be a student at San Diego State University, to be an Aztec, and not necessarily having them build their identity around the house parties that may be cropping up that would be filling those gaps in their social needs early on. We do throw a few events outside the first 5 weeks. We often throw a Halloween party, especially if Halloween is on a weekend, and so that we can actually throw a party on the nights that they would typically be looking for that sort of party and compete with them with a large-scale costume event. And then we throw a few back to school, welcome back events in the spring semester as well. So those are our programs as part of Aztec Nights, and I'm really pleased to have been able to share them with you.